Hey guys, back again with some Budget Modern, and today we're going to be talking about a deck that's very long-hated in Modern, and it's not something that you play in casual play groups. This is going to be something that you either play online or at tournaments. It's not something just play with your friends. It's a very cheap deck, and all it costs you really is your friend group. Nobody in your who plays casually wants to play against this deck, though it is a very complicated and very fun deck that, though it looking at it seems like, oh, you're just gonna do the same thing every game, it's really every game it's like, oh, am I gonna make it? Oh, am I gonna make it? Yeah, I made it, and here I am. And so it's very high stress sometimes, like, oh, am I actually gonna be able to pull it off? Because you're really just trying to filter through your deck while you still have mana, and you're trying to get to your win condition, and you're trying to cast enough spells, and really it's a very fun to just play from game to game. Now I'm going to start off by giving by showing you guys how we win, then how we can make it easier through using our creatures, and then what we can use in the form of instants and sorceries to get us to that point. Now, how we win is by casting a bunch of spells and profiting off the mechanic Storm. Storm says, when you cast a spell, copy it for each spell cast for it this turn. You may choose new targets for the copies. Now, this is going to mean that whenever we cast this, let's say we've cast 3 spells this turn, and then we cast Grape Shot. What that's going to do is it's going to copy it 3 times, and if our opponent tries to counter our Grape Shot, we still have those 3 copies. So just a single counter spell doesn't mean that they will survive. Anyway, I know I just said 3, but our concept in this deck, our goal is to cast like 20 to 30 of these Grape Shots. The next way we win is Empty the Warrens, because a very common way for people to solve this problem is by playing either a card called Damping Sphere, which we have a solution to in our sideboard, or casting a card called, what's it called? By casting Leyline of Sanctity, which Leyline of Sanctity gives them hexproof. And so if we need to get past their hexproof, then we're just going to be able to say, okay, we have a bunch of red goblins on the board now that you can't get hexproof against. They don't have indestructible. They can't, like, if the only way they stop this is if they happen to also have either a board wipe or something like Ensnaring Bridge. Anyway, but that's our way of winning, and if they have Leyline or Bridge, we do actually have a 1 of Repeal to help us deal with that. It's easier to have multiple options. Anyway, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk about the creatures in the deck and then how we actually get our storm count up. Now, our creatures in the deck are Brawl Chief of Compliance, which says instant sorceries you cast cost 1 less to cast, and it says whenever a spell or ability you control counters a spell successfully, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. Now, what that's gonna do is sometimes, occasionally, we do have counterspells in this. Sometimes we're going to get that use of drawing a card, discarding card, but really the biggest reason it's in here is instant sorceries cost 1 less to cast. Next up is Goblin Electromancer, which is basically a dumbed down Brawl. It is a bit harder to cast, but we will have no problem at all casting it in this deck. Instant sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and it's a 2/2. And Brawl is a 1/3, but Power and Toughness doesn't matter a ton in this deck because you're not doing a ton of attacking with it. But it's really in there so that all of your instant sorceries cost 1 less to cast. You'll see we have a bunch of 2-drops, and a bunch that will suddenly become 1-drops, a bunch of, well, we actually just have the 1 3-drop that becomes a 2-drop, and then all of these 4-drops here are suddenly going to become 3-drops. And that may seem like minimal, but that is insane, especially for those 2-drops that become 1-drops. Anyway, also the way that these two work with X costs, like Repeal, is that 1 that you use on Repeal can be lowered by, so like if you have a Goblin Electromancer out, that spell reduction counts towards X. So if you spend 1 mana on repeal, if you have Gum Electromancer out, X can equal 1. Anyway, time to talk about the spells in our deck. We have Opt to scry 1 and draw a card. That's going to be for a single blue mana. That's going to be a very nice way to filter our deck, and honestly, a way we can use it in our first few turns to set up our combo. Next up is Repeal, so that we can deal with things that our opponents are playing, such as Ensnaring Bridge, Leyline of Sanctity, anything huge that we just need to get rid of. But also another thing that it can do is refill our hand, because almost everything in the deck should say draw a card. Not all of them do, but the more that say draw cards, the better. Next up is Serum Visions. It's another idea for Opt, except it says draw 1, scry 2. So Opt is really more of a spell that you would cast on the turn that you're comboing off. When I say comboing off, I really do mean we're trying to cast like 20 spells in one turn. Anyway, so this is more of a setup card because it's like, okay, we're going to do it in advance. Opt lets you scry and then draw so you know what you're drawing. Serum Visions lets you draw a card blindly, but then sets up the rest of your turn or future turns. Desperate Ritual, and you can cast either in the early stages of the game, or you can cast either on the turn of. Both are amazing cards. Desperate Ritual is red, red, red. Add red, red, red to your mana pool for 1 and red. Most often, this is going to read, pay 1 red, add 3 red because of your creatures. And then it says Splice into Arcane. As you play an Arcane spell, you may reveal this card from your hand and pay its splice cost. If you do, add this spell's effects to that spell. If I have 2 Desperate Rituals in my hand and an Electromancer out, I pay a single red to use Desperate Ritual, and then I pay 2 more red. Sadly, cost reduction does not affect splice, but you would add an additional 2 red to your cost, and then you reveal it from your hand, and it says add 6 red now. But the point of that is that you still have the second Desperate Ritual in your hand, and you can cast it again. That's just a way to get a ton of mana. Grape Shot as our win condition. Manamorphose, it says 1 and then hybrid for red and green. Add 2 mana of any color to your mana pool. Draw a card. It's a cantrip, a way to draw a card, and it's a way to filter our mana. It's also, if we have any of our creatures out, it's 1 mana, add 2. So it's another way to profit mana. We have a lot of ways to add red mana to our mana pool, but this is one of our only ways to add blue. And you'll notice we have things like Opt and Serum Visions. Next up is Pyretic Ritual. It's basically Desperate Ritual, but it does not have Splice and Arcane. Remand, counter target spell. If that spell is countered this way, return it to its owner's hand instead of that player's graveyard. Draw a card. It's another cantrip, but it's a counter spell. And so, worst case scenario, we remand our own Grape Shot to play it again. If we don't want to counter our opponent's stuff, we can remand our own spell so that we can get yet even more Grape Shots. We only have to get a storm count of 10 at that point to kill our opponent, because we just bounce a Grape Shot, then play it again, and then we copy all the spells again. Slumdy Vision is a way for us to filter our deck, as well as having that extra land if we really need it. Empty the Warrens is a secondary win condition. Gifts Ungiven. You search your deck for 4 cards, and your opponent puts, and then you put them with, you reveal them. Your opponent puts 2 of them in the graveyard and 2 of them to your hand. And so usually the big targets of this are you're going to grab at least 1 Past in Flames. And typically like a Grape Shot or an Empty the Warrens, but Past in Flames. Because whether or not you put this, if they decide to put this in your hand or the graveyard, you can cast it. It has flashback and it can go to your hand as well. What this is going to do is it's going to give all the instants and sorceries in your graveyard flashback until end of turn, where flashback is equal to the mana cost. Now, what that's going to do is it's going to allow you to cast all the spells you already cast this turn. All the spells that gave you mana, you can refuel yourself even if you're running low on mana. So, this is going to be a way to really hit our storm count. Now, the thing to keep in mind with this is that if we cast any spells that we like drew out of our deck or had in our hand after this, the only cards that are affected when we cast this are the cards that are currently in our graveyard. So any other cards that would be put into our graveyard this turn aren't affected by that Past in Flames. But we do have 2 of them in here. And that's how you, and that's really, that's explaining this card, but that's also explaining this card. That's why it's in here. Anyway, those are all the spells for our deck. Really, you're trying to just draw cards, add mana, and get a very high storm count so you can Grape Shot and so you can empty the Warrens. Our mana base is 4 islands, 6 mountains, 4 Shivan Reef, and 4 Temple Epiphany. Temple Epiphany is very nice for setting up your combo, and Shivan Reef I play in the normal version of the deck anyway, the non-budget version. It's a very nice card. You can use it for your setup turns, or you can use it the turn you combo off. Since the games are so short anyway, you don't care about the 1 damage being dealt to you. Sideboard 2 dispels for things, for example, the Trickery combo is a very big thing you can hit with this. I don't like I don't like certain things that your opponents can do during our turn to mess with Storm. And one of the things that you can stop with Storm is the Trickery combo. You can remand stuff to their hand. You can remand Trickery to their hand. You can dispel it. Anything. Flame Slash in case we need some more creature hate. Lightning Bolt for creature hate, but also a way to deal with our opponent. The reason why we don't have 4 bolts is Flame Slash can also just deal more damage. Braid to deal with artifacts, as I mentioned earlier. Things like Damping Sphere or Ensnaring Bridge can sometimes affect us. It's also more creature hate. Aria of Flame is another way that we can we can take an alternative route of winning the game. This is how we typically play against a deck like Damping Sphere. If we think we're gonna we think they're gonna bring it in, we bring this in. Next up is Dismember. It's extra creature hate, and I know there are other cards that you can really use for this. I know there's a blue card that was just printed, Bind the Monster, but this you don't need blue mana for. And sometimes we can be pretty tight on blue mana. Mystical Dispute for control decks, combo decks, etc. Pieces of the Puzzle. It's a very reveal the top 5 cards of your library. Put 2 instant sorceries from among them into your hand and the rest in your graveyard. Sometimes you just need grind your matches where you can just go and find your stuff. For example, if you bring in Aria of Flame, you're going to want to bring in these just so that you can play a longer game. Empty the Warrens as an extra way. If you think they're going to bring in Leyline of Sanctities, you can bring these in. Go to 1 Grape Shot, go to 2 Empty the Warrens, and then you're set. Anyway, it's a very sweet deck, and your opponent, your friends will hate you. They'll never play Magic with you, but it's very fun to play online, and it's always a grind. It's always a grind. See if you can combo off this turn, or see if it's just gonna be a dud. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the deck, and I will see you next time.